The story does not begin with a sword, a battlefield, or even Miyamoto Musashi himself. It begins inside the modern mind, fractured, overstimulated, and quietly exhausted. Today's man wakes up already behind, carrying invisible pressure before his feet touch the ground. Notifications, expectations, comparisons, and fears stack up silently, creating a constant low-level anxiety that never fully leaves. Most people believe this anxiety is normal, something to be managed with distractions, motivation, or temporary escapes. Ancient Japan saw this state very differently. To them, a restless mind was not a personality trait or a medical label, it was a sign of internal disorder. Musashi's era understood that fear and anxiety do not originate from the world, but from misalignment within the individual. When the mind runs faster than the body, when desire outruns discipline, when thought disconnects from action, courage collapses. The forbidden nature of Musashi's method lies in this uncomfortable truth: anxiety is not cured by comfort, but by order. From a young age, Musashi trained under conditions designed to strip illusions away. Cold mornings, repetitive movements, silence, and solitude were not punishments, they were tools. These practices forced the mind to confront itself without distraction. In that stillness, fear surfaced clearly instead of hiding behind noise. Modern life does the opposite. It numbs fear temporarily while allowing it to grow stronger beneath the surface. This is why people today feel anxious even when nothing is wrong. Their nervous systems have never been trained to sit inside uncertainty. Musashi's discipline targeted this weakness directly. He believed that courage was not an emotion you summon in dramatic moments, but a state you build slowly through daily alignment. When your body is disciplined, your breath controlled, and your actions deliberate, the mind naturally follows. One of the most misunderstood ideas about ancient warriors is that they lived in constant aggression. In reality, Musashi emphasized calm above all else. Calm was not passivity, it was readiness without tension. A tense man reacts emotionally. A calm man responds decisively. Anxiety, in Musashi's philosophy, was a form of wasted energy, a signal that the mind was fighting reality instead of accepting it. This is why his training focused so heavily on presence. Every movement had to be intentional. Every strike, step, and breath was an act of awareness. Over time, this awareness dissolved fear. Not because danger disappeared, but because the practitioner learned to meet danger without inner resistance. What makes this method so powerful, and so hidden, is that it cannot be rushed or commercialized. There are no shortcuts, affirmations, or instant confidence tricks. The discipline demands repetition without reward, effort without applause. This directly contradicts modern culture, which thrives on quick wins and visible validation. Musashi warned that a man who seeks comfort before mastery will always remain fragile. True courage, he taught, is quiet. It does not announce itself. It shows up consistently, especially when no one is watching. This is why his teachings were not widely shared. They required patience, humility, and a willingness to endure discomfort without explanation. At its core, the ancient Japanese method is about restoring authority within yourself. Anxiety takes control when the mind doubts the body and the body distrusts the mind. Musashi's path reunites them through disciplined action. Each day, you do what must be done regardless of mood. Slowly, the nervous system learns that discomfort is survivable. Fear loses its grip. Courage stops being something you chase and becomes something you live. This is the foundation of unshakable strength, and it is where the journey truly begins. Once the mind begins to settle through discipline, the next stage of the ancient Japanese method reveals itself: the destruction of false urgency. Musashi observed that most fear is not born from real danger, but from imagined futures. The mind projects loss, humiliation, pain, or failure long before any of these things occur. This projection creates haste, and haste fractures judgment. In combat, a rushed strike exposes weakness. In life, rushed decisions do the same. Musashi trained himself to move at the speed of reality, not the speed of fear. This distinction was central to his invincibility. By slowing the mind, he gained time that others could not perceive. Where opponents saw chaos, he saw patterns. Where they panicked, he waited. Ancient training halls were designed to cultivate this perception. Long periods of stillness were enforced not as meditation in the modern sense, but as a confrontation with impatience. The body would ache, the legs would tremble, and the mind would scream for movement. Most people today mistake this discomfort for danger. Musashi understood it as conditioning. By remaining still while the urge to escape rose and fell, he rewired his nervous system. The brain learned that urgency was often a lie. This practice directly dismantled anxiety, because anxiety feeds on the belief that something must be done immediately or everything will collapse. When that belief dissolves, fear loses its fuel. This is why Musashi warned against overthinking. Thought, when untethered from action, multiplies fear. The modern world rewards constant analysis, endless planning, and hypothetical scenarios. Musashi saw this as a weakness. He believed clarity comes from engagement, not speculation. His discipline demanded full presence in the current moment, not the imagined outcome. When you are fully engaged in what you are doing, anxiety has no space to operate. The mind cannot panic about tomorrow while the body is anchored in today. This is not denial of the future, it is mastery of the present. Another forbidden aspect of this method was Musashi's rejection of external validation. He deliberately avoided schools, titles, and rigid traditions that fed ego rather than skill. Ego, he believed, was one of fear's most effective disguises. When a man's identity depends on reputation, praise, or comparison, he becomes fragile. Anxiety thrives in fragility. Musashi trained to become internally referenced. Success was measured by alignment, not applause. Failure was treated as instruction, not identity. This mental posture made him immune to psychological warfare. Insults, intimidation, and pressure tactics failed because there was nothing to protect. Without attachment to image, fear had no leverage. In modern terms, this translates into an uncomfortable truth: anxiety often increases as life becomes easier. Comfort creates attachment. Attachment creates fear of loss. Musashi's path deliberately reduced attachment by training under minimal conditions. Simple clothing, sparse environments, and strict routines removed unnecessary stimulation. This was not asceticism for its own sake, but a strategic simplification of life. When fewer things control you, fewer things can threaten you. Courage grows naturally in this environment, not as bravado, but as quiet certainty. The second stage of the ancient method, then, is about reclaiming time, attention, and internal authority. By slowing down, rejecting false urgency, and anchoring identity in discipline rather than outcome, anxiety begins to dissolve at its root. Fear no longer dictates pace or direction. Instead, action becomes deliberate, grounded, and precise. This is how Musashi stepped into every encounter already victorious, not because he predicted the outcome, but because his mind could no longer be shaken. As the discipline deepened, Musashi entered a phase that many found unsettling: deliberate exposure to uncertainty. Where most people seek control to feel safe, Musashi learned to feel safe without control. This was one of the most radical elements of the ancient Japanese method, and one that directly forged unshakable courage. Anxiety thrives on the illusion that certainty equals security. Musashi dismantled this illusion by training in environments where outcomes could not be predicted. He traveled constantly, fought unfamiliar opponents, and adapted to different terrains, weapons, and conditions. Each variable stripped away dependence on routine and forced the mind to remain flexible. Flexibility, not certainty, became the foundation of confidence. In his writings, Musashi warned against becoming attached to any single way of doing things. A fixed method, he argued, creates blind spots. When circumstances shift, the rigid mind panics. The adaptable mind adjusts. This principle extended beyond combat into daily life. By refusing to cling to one identity, one plan, or one expectation, Musashi made fear irrelevant. There was nothing to lose, because nothing was held too tightly. Modern anxiety often emerges from overinvestment in a single outcome. When everything depends on one result, the nervous system remains in a constant state of threat. Musashi's approach diffused this pressure by spreading attention across awareness rather than expectation. One of the harshest exercises used to cultivate this mindset involved purposeful discomfort. Hunger, fatigue, cold, and isolation were not avoided but integrated into training. These conditions revealed an important truth: the body is far more resilient than the mind believes. Anxiety exaggerates discomfort and predicts collapse long before it occurs. By repeatedly surviving hardship without catastrophe, Musashi trained his nervous system to stop overreacting. The brain learned through experience that discomfort was not synonymous with danger. This lesson alone dismantled much of fear's power. When the mind stops catastrophizing sensation, courage becomes a natural response rather than a forced one. Another critical element of this stage was Musashi's relationship with failure. He did not interpret failure as evidence of inadequacy, but as data. Each loss of balance, misstep, or near defeat was analyzed without emotion. Emotional reactions, he believed, distorted perception. Fear is emotional noise that interferes with learning. By observing mistakes calmly, Musashi extracted insight instead of shame. This approach transformed fear from an enemy into a teacher. Anxiety loses strength when it is no longer resisted or dramatized. When fear is studied rather than avoided, it dissolves into information. Musashi also practiced mental invisibility. He avoided predictable patterns, public declarations, and visible ambition. This was not secrecy born of fear, but freedom from scrutiny. The more visible the ego, the more pressure it attracts. Modern life encourages constant self-display, comparison, and performance. Musashi's method ran in the opposite direction. By becoming internally focused and externally quiet, he reduced psychological interference. There was no audience to impress, no narrative to maintain. Without performance anxiety, action became clean and decisive. This stage of the ancient method teaches that courage is not the absence of fear, but the absence of attachment to control. When uncertainty is accepted rather than resisted, the mind stops bracing for impact. Energy that was once spent on worry becomes available for perception and response. Musashi did not eliminate danger from his life, he eliminated the mental habits that magnified it. In doing so, he achieved a state where anxiety could no longer dominate. What remained was a calm readiness, capable of meeting whatever emerged without hesitation or collapse. As Musashi's discipline progressed, the focus shifted from reacting to pressure toward mastering timing, a skill he considered more decisive than raw strength or speed. Timing, in his philosophy, was not merely about when to strike, but about when to remain still. Most people act too early or too late because anxiety pushes them to escape uncertainty. Musashi trained himself to remain comfortable inside that uncertainty until the precise moment revealed itself. This patience was not passive, it was an active state of awareness, where the mind remained fully engaged without rushing toward resolution. Through this, he cultivated a level of focus that felt almost supernatural to those who observed him. This stage of training required an intimate understanding of internal impulses. Musashi paid close attention to the moment when the urge to act arose. He noticed that this impulse was often driven not by necessity, but by discomfort. The mind seeks relief from tension and uses action as an escape. By resisting premature movement, Musashi learned to separate true opportunity from emotional reaction. This ability extended beyond combat into every decision he made. He acted only when conditions aligned, not when impatience demanded motion. Over time, this discipline created a mind that was sharp but unhurried, alert yet calm. Musashi believed that poor timing was the root of most failure. A correct action executed at the wrong moment became a mistake. This principle explains why many intelligent and capable people still fail under pressure. They rush conclusions, speak too soon, commit before clarity emerges. Anxiety compresses time, creating the illusion that delay equals loss. Musashi reversed this conditioning by expanding his perception of time under stress. Through repeated exposure to high-stakes situations, his nervous system adapted. What felt urgent to others felt manageable to him. Time slowed not because reality changed, but because his internal reaction did. Another essential practice during this phase was intentional misdirection of attention. Musashi trained himself to see the whole field rather than fixating on a single threat. Narrow focus, comfort, he understood, dulled perception. By staying slightly out of balance, he kept his senses sharp. This willingness to remain a beginner prevented stagnation. Many people stop growing not because they lack ability, but because they cling to what they already know. Musashi's method rejected mastery that relied on repetition alone. True mastery, he believed, required constant adaptation. Through this practice, focus evolved from effort into instinct. Musashi no longer forced concentration, it emerged naturally from presence. Distractions lost their grip because his attention was anchored in the present moment rather than hypothetical outcomes. The future held no leverage over him. By mastering timing, Musashi aligned action with reality rather than desire. This alignment eliminated hesitation and regret, because each move was made with full awareness. In this state, focus was no longer fragile. It could withstand pressure, unpredictability, and chaos without fracturing. This was the foundation upon which his reputation for invincibility was built. At this stage of the discipline, Musashi's focus shifted inward, toward the elimination of internal noise. He understood that distraction does not originate in the environment but an unresolved conflict within the mind. Thoughts that argue, doubt, or rehearse outcomes fragment attention and drain energy. Musashi did not attempt to silence these thoughts through force. Instead, he trained himself to observe them without attachment. By refusing to identify with every passing impulse, he weakened their influence. Over time, mental chatter lost its urgency, and what remained was a steady, grounded awareness capable of sustaining focus for long periods without fatigue. Musashi recognized that most people confuse thinking with preparation. In reality, excessive thinking often serves as a substitute for action. The mind loops endlessly not because more analysis is needed, but because the body is hesitant to engage. To correct this imbalance, Musashi deliberately paired thought with movement. Every insight was tested through practice. Every idea faced resistance in the real world. This closed loop between mind and body prevented abstraction from becoming avoidance. Focus, in this sense, was not a mental trick but a state of embodied readiness. Another critical element of this phase was emotional regulation. Musashi observed that emotions like anger, fear, and pride were the greatest enemies of clarity. They distorted perception and narrowed options. Rather than suppressing emotion, he trained to feel it fully without allowing it to dictate behavior. This required repeated exposure to emotionally charged situations where composure was tested. Each successful encounter strengthened his nervous system's ability to remain stable under intensity. Calm was no longer an effort but a conditioned response. Musashi also refined his relationship with fatigue. He learned that exhaustion often creates false narratives in the mind, convincing a person that they are incapable when they are merely uncomfortable. By training beyond the point where his mind wanted to stop, he exposed these narratives as illusions. This did not mean reckless overexertion. It meant disciplined exposure to strain followed by recovery. Through this process, he discovered that focus deepens when the mind trusts the body to endure. Doubt fades when the system proves its resilience repeatedly. Silence became another tool in Musashi's discipline. He intentionally reduced unnecessary speech, not as an act of withdrawal, but as a method of conserving mental energy. Speaking carelessly scattered attention and reinforced impulsive thinking. By choosing his words carefully or remaining silent, he sharpened his internal dialogue. This restraint extended to his actions as well. He avoided wasted movement, wasted effort, and wasted emotion. Everything served a purpose. Focus, then, was not about intensity but about precision. As internal noise diminished, Musashi experienced a qualitative shift in perception. Decisions felt clearer, not because they were easier, but because fewer voices competed for control. The mind stopped resisting itself. Action followed thought without delay. This integration created a sense of inevitability in his movements. Observers described his presence as unsettling, not because he appeared aggressive, but because he was unmistakably centered. This stage of the discipline marked the transition from forced focus to natural clarity. From here onward, attention was no longer something to be summoned. It was simply how Musashi existed within each moment. By the sixth phase of this discipline, focus was no longer something Musashi consciously tried to achieve, it became the default state from which he operated. The struggle that most people experience when attempting to concentrate had dissolved because the internal divisions that caused it were gone. Thought, intention, and action moved in a single direction. This alignment created a kind of mental silence that was not empty but alert, responsive, and precise. In this state, Musashi could perceive subtle changes in his environment and in himself without distraction or delay. Musashi understood that clarity under pressure does not come from confidence alone, but from familiarity with stress. To maintain this familiarity, he continued to place himself in demanding conditions even after mastery was achieved. Comfort was treated as a warning sign, not a reward. When the body grows accustomed to ease, the mind becomes fragile. Musashi avoided this trap by deliberately choosing difficulty in controlled ways. Long hours of solitary training, exposure to uncertainty, and physical exhaustion were not punishments but calibrations. They ensured that his nervous system remained resilient and adaptable. In this phase, discipline also reshaped Musashi's sense of time. Urgency lost its power over him. He no longer rushed decisions or actions, nor did he delay them unnecessarily. Each movement occurred when it was most efficient, not when emotion demanded it. This created an impression of slowness to those who misunderstood it, but in reality, it was optimal timing. Focus sharpened not by speed, but by the elimination of wasted motion. Everything he did served a clear function, and nothing was performed for appearance or approval. Musashi's relationship with fear changed fundamentally at this stage. Fear still appeared, but it no longer disrupted his thinking. He treated it as information rather than a command. If fear signaled a real threat, he adjusted strategy. If it arose from uncertainty or ego, he ignored it. This discernment prevented panic and recklessness alike. Focus thrived because emotional reactions were filtered before they reached behavior. The mind remained steady, even when circumstances were unpredictable. Another transformation occurred in Musashi's sense of identity. He no longer defined himself by outcomes, victories, or reputation. Identity anchored to results creates anxiety because results are never fully controllable. Instead, Musashi identified with process and principle. As long as his actions aligned with his discipline, external outcomes held less psychological weight. This freed enormous mental capacity. Without the burden of self-evaluation in every moment, attention could remain fully present. This stage also revealed the deeper purpose of the forbidden discipline. It was not merely about personal mastery but about becoming unshakable in any environment. Musashi's focus did not depend on silence, solitude, or ideal conditions. It traveled with him. Noise, chaos, and opposition no longer disrupted his internal order. This portability of focus was what made him unstoppable. He did not need to control the world to remain clear. He had already mastered the only domain that mattered. His own internal state. In the seventh stage, the discipline reached a point where effort disappeared from the experience of focus. Musashi was no longer applying concentration or summoning mental strength. His attention rested naturally where it was needed, without strain. This did not mean the challenges became easier, it meant resistance had been removed. What once required willpower now unfolded automatically because the internal system was fully aligned. Focus became less like force and more like gravity. At this level, Musashi's actions were guided by restraint rather than aggression. He understood that wasted energy was a form of weakness. Every unnecessary thought, movement, or emotional reaction drained clarity. By eliminating excess, he preserved sharpness. This is where many fail, believing intensity creates power. Musashi saw the opposite. Control created power. The ability to remain composed while others rushed or panicked gave him a decisive advantage. His stillness was not passivity, it was readiness. The seventh stage also refined his perception of opponents and situations. Because his mind was not crowded by internal noise, he could read subtle cues others missed. Shifts in posture, breathing, and intention became visible. Focus expanded beyond narrow concentration into awareness. This allowed Musashi to respond rather than react. Reaction is always late. Response is immediate. The difference lies in clarity. When the mind is calm, perception accelerates. Ego had little influence at this stage. Musashi no longer needed to prove strength, intelligence, or superiority. The need to demonstrate ability often sabotages focus by pulling attention outward. By abandoning performance, Musashi protected his inner state. He acted according to necessity, not recognition. This made his movements unpredictable and efficient. Without ego-driven patterns, there was nothing for an opponent to exploit. Another critical shift occurred in how Musashi handled uncertainty. Where others sought certainty before acting, he accepted uncertainty as a constant. Focus did not require guarantees. It required adaptability. He trained his mind to remain clear even when outcomes were unknown. This removed hesitation. Decision-making became fluid because it was not tied to perfect information. He trusted his preparation, not his predictions. In this stage, the discipline revealed its true nature. It was no longer a method for improvement but a state of being. Focus was not something Musashi entered and exited. It was the baseline from which all action emerged. This made him appear calm, even indifferent, in situations that overwhelmed others. But beneath that calm was total engagement. Every sense was active. Every movement intentional. The seventh stage marked the transition from mastery as practice to mastery as identity. In the eighth stage, Musashi's focus evolved beyond personal performance and became inseparable from his environment. He was no longer centered only on his own mind or body but fully integrated with the moment itself. Thought, perception, and action merged into a single continuous flow. There was no pause between seeing and doing. This state was not mystical or emotional, it was the result of long conditioning. Focus here was effortless because nothing inside him was resisting reality. At this level, Musashi understood that control did not come from dominance but from timing. He did not rush to act, nor did he hesitate. Action emerged precisely when required. This sensitivity to timing allowed him to conserve energy while remaining decisive. Where others burned themselves out through constant tension, Musashi stayed relaxed yet alert. His calm presence often unsettled opponents more than overt aggression. Uncertainty affected them, not him. The eighth stage also sharpened Musashi's relationship with fear. Fear no longer appeared as an obstacle to be overcome. It became a signal to refine attention. When tension arose, he did not suppress it or feed it. He observed it without attachment. This prevented fear from escalating into panic or impulsive action. By remaining present, fear lost its authority. Focus stayed intact because emotional reactions were no longer driving behavior. Another defining feature of this stage was adaptability. Musashi no longer relied on fixed strategies. Plans existed, but they were flexible. He understood that rigid plans break under pressure. Focus required openness. When circumstances shifted, he adjusted instantly without frustration. This flexibility did not come from indecision but from confidence in his ability to respond. The discipline had trained him to trust his awareness rather than cling to structure. At this stage, Musashi's focus influenced others without intention. His presence alone altered the atmosphere. Opponents sensed his steadiness and often projected their own doubts onto it. This psychological effect was not manipulation. It was coherence. When a person is fully aligned, the absence of internal conflict becomes visible. Others feel it instinctively, especially in high-stakes situations. The 8th stage revealed why the discipline was considered forbidden. It dismantled the illusion that control comes from force, intellect alone, or emotional intensity. Instead, it demonstrated that true focus arises from integration. Mind and body working as one system, responding naturally to reality. This level could not be taught through words. It had to be lived. Musashi's strength at this stage was quiet, precise, and unshakable. Focus was no longer something he used. It was something he embodied. In the 9th stage, Musashi's focus matured into something colder, clearer, and almost impersonal. There was no longer any attachment to outcome, reputation, or even victory itself. His attention rested entirely on execution. This detachment did not weaken him, it refined him. By removing emotional investment, he eliminated distortion. Every movement became precise because nothing extra interfered. Focus here was not intense in the emotional sense. It was clean. At this level, Musashi no longer fought opponents as individuals. He engaged situations. People, terrain, timing, and momentum were processed as one system. This system's level awareness allowed him to act with efficiency rather than effort. Where others reacted to surface events, Musashi responded to underlying structure. He saw where pressure would emerge before it appeared. His focus anticipated rather than chased reality. The 9th stage also transformed his relationship with decision-making. Choice became immediate. There was no internal debate, no weighing of options under stress. The correct action revealed itself because attention was undivided. This did not mean Musashi acted recklessly. It meant he had removed hesitation entirely. Hesitation had been burned out through years of disciplined exposure to uncertainty. Focus here was trust in perception. Fear, at this stage, was nearly silent. Not absent, but irrelevant. It no longer shaped behavior. Fear existed only as a background signal, informing awareness without commanding it. Because Musashi had trained his nervous system to remain functional under extreme pressure, his mind stayed clear even when consequences were severe. Focus was maintained not by suppressing emotion but by refusing to let emotion steer action. Another key aspect of the 9th stage was restraint. Musashi did not seek conflict unnecessarily. He understood that focus wasted is focus lost. He conserved energy, avoided meaningless confrontation, and acted only when action served a purpose. This selectivity was not avoidance. It was mastery. True focus knows when not to engage. Silence, stillness, and patience became tools as powerful as movement. At this level, Musashi's presence carried authority without display. He did not need to prove competence. It was evident in how he moved, how he waited, and how he acted when the moment arrived. Others often mistook this calm for indifference. In reality, it was total engagement without emotional turbulence. Focus was absolute because nothing inside him was pulling attention away. The 9th stage revealed the final refinement of the forbidden discipline. Focus was no longer something Musashi summoned. It was the default state. Distraction required effort, not attention. His mind rested naturally in clarity because there was no unresolved internal conflict. This is why few ever reach this level. It requires not just discipline, but surrender of ego. Musashi did not become powerful by adding more. He became powerful by removing everything unnecessary. In the final stage, Musashi's focus ceased to feel like a skill at all. It became his way of being. There was no separation between preparation and action, between thought and movement, between intention and execution. Everything operated as one continuous flow. This was not trance or detachment from reality. It was the opposite. He was fully present, fully aware, without resistance. Focus here was not forced. It was inevitable. At this level, effort disappeared. Not because things became easy, but because friction was gone. The internal struggle that drains attention in most people no longer existed. Musashi did not argue with himself. He did not negotiate with doubt. He did not seek certainty before acting. His training had created something more reliable than confidence: alignment. When perception, decision, and action align, focus becomes effortless. Musashi understood that mastery was never about domination of others. It was about dominion over distraction. The ability to remain undisturbed while the world tried to pull attention in 1,000 directions. This is why his method was forbidden. Not because it was secret, but because it dismantled illusions people rely on to avoid responsibility. It offered no shortcuts, no motivation, no external validation. Only training, repetition, and exposure to reality. In this final stage, Musashi no longer identified himself as a warrior, a swordsman, or even a master. Identity itself became irrelevant. Labels invite attachment, and attachment fractures focus. He moved according to principle, not self-image. This allowed him to adapt endlessly without internal resistance. When conditions changed, he changed. When chaos appeared, he adjusted. Focus was fluid, not rigid. Time itself felt different at this level. Moments expanded. Decisions slowed externally but sharpened internally. While others rushed, Musashi waited. While others hesitated, he acted. This control of timing was the ultimate expression of focus. Acting neither too early nor too late, but exactly when reality opened the door. This precision made his actions appear almost effortless, even inevitable, to those watching. Fear had no power here because fear feeds on imagined futures. Musashi's attention never left the present. There was nothing for fear to attach to. Pain, risk, and uncertainty were processed as information, not threats. This allowed him to remain clear when others collapsed emotionally. Focus became a stabilizing force, not just for himself, but for the environment around him. The final truth of Musashi's method is simple and unsettling. Elite-level focus is not achieved by thinking harder. It is built by removing everything that divides you internally. Every distraction, every excuse, every identity that keeps you comfortable instead of capable must be stripped away. What remains is not superhuman. It is fully human, operating without self-sabotage. This is why the method endures. It does not expire with time, technology, or culture. It applies wherever pressure exists. And once this level of focus is reached, it does not feel like victory. It feels like clarity. Like finally standing where you were always meant to stand, fully present, fully capable, and impossible to move.